The Bill Clark Show, presented by Dr. Pepper. And now, Coach Bill Clark.
Welcome in. It's the Bill Clark Show, presented by Dr. Pepper, Pat Smith, Landrum Roberts, along with Coach Bill Clark. And Bill, another fantastic week of football.
Yeah, I think just what we're starting to see people evolve and teams evolve, different quarterbacks. How do they respond to losses? As the season goes, that's kind of the things we're going to be talking about. So just kind of an overview. We're talking a lot of local teams, obviously the Alabama, Auburn, UAB, Jacksonville State. We want to give you the local flavor. We're going to go SEC, national flavor. We're going to start getting more into X's and O's and kind of talking about specifics, and hopefully that's some things that people kind of want to hear, the behind-the-scene things that we've talked about from a coach's perspective.
Speaking of that, Alabama, the first road test for Kalen DeBoer and his tenure there, but also you step up in competition, not to take anything away from South Florida, but you think Big Ten, Wisconsin, 22 straight consecutive winning seasons, playing there at Camp Randall. I think that Alabama sustaining or withstanding some of that adversity early on, Coach, and also just taking the momentum of that game and how it played out. First of all, Kane Womack in that defense, how did you think that they defended the Badgers?
Yeah, so, we talked about the early game. I thought they responded very well. Defensively, I think we got to see a little bit more of maybe what they should be. I think we had some takeaways in that game. I thought we saw some young DBs step up. Once again, how good is Wisconsin, but on the road, hostile environment. We created turnovers. Some a little bit of bend but don't break, but I was impressed with the defense. We'll talk about their special teams for a minute. I think the punter was the national –
Burnett, yeah.
Was a national player of the week as a punter. I mean, he was a definite weapon. That's going to be a big deal as the season goes on. You got a guy kicking 60-something yarders and averaging 49 yards a punt.
On the offensive side of the ball, we got to talk about him. He's 17 years old. Ryan Williams. What he presents, I know that there are other guys that you have to defend, and you're only allowed 11 on that side of the ball if you're Wisconsin or whoever Alabama's playing. But right now, it looks like Ryan Williams, he's a guy that's unguardable. Your thoughts and what your approach would be if you're trying to defend him?
Well, he separates. He separates from the DB. Great hands, not good hands, and that's what you want, a guy that makes every catch, makes them look easy. He's a vertical threat, which is what we talked about when I spread you horizontally and I spread you vertically. Oh, by the way, our quarterback's really a running back. So I thought Milroe was terrific. 3 TDs, 2 rushing TDs, and then, of course, you got Williams that made almost a breakout play, and I think that's what we're seeing out of him week after week.
When you look at that Alabama defense, before we move on from Bama, the youngsters, those guys, do you see those guys kind of rounding into that position? Do you still see that? Not that they've been tested yet. Mm-hmm. They will be tested against Georgia. We'll talk about that next week. But overall, through the first 3 games, what have you seen from the Alabama secondary?
Yeah, I think we're seeing some really good things. I think they tackle well, and that's one of the things I like to see. And I do want to touch on the D-line. I think, kind of starting to see those guys. And, you've got, without going through all the names, I think you're seeing their depth, which really is what separates. When you start talking about up front on both sides of the ball, I thought Bill Belichick, and I know we're not talking NFL, but I think he made a point the other night that I thought was great when you're talking about drafting. What do you do up front? So we know we got all these skill guys, Williams and Milroe and all those, but what do they look like up front? So I'm going to go to the D-line, which I think obviously that's where it starts, and I'm starting to see those guys show up.
Meanwhile, in Fayetteville, Arkansas, it was a game. I got to travel to Fayetteville. I was there on the sideline. Very impressive bounce-back game after what happened at Louisiana Monroe for Trent Dilfer and the Blazers. You can't fault the character of this team and those guys to battle back a heavy underdog in an SEC environment. I thought that UAB, whether it was game plan or just the level of play we saw Saturday versus the first 2 weeks, it was definitely a notch up.
Yeah, I think obviously I've still got a lot of those guys that I recruited and were part of. That's what you want to see. How do you respond to a loss? And that's what we're going to talk about later in the show. That's what it looks like from an effort standpoint. They had the great start. And really, when you can catch an SEC team that's kind of at the bottom of that league, which is saying something when they all are good, but at the bottom of that league, you got a chance. I think they caught them right. Obviously didn't play very well in Monroe. We got to give Monroe credit. Monroe played well. But it was a great bounce back. They had a chance at the end. They were within 3 points. So, they've got a chance as we move forward, as they start to get in conference play soon.
All right, so I got to ask you about Georgia. They go to Lexington. It's a place where history will tell you that they've had problems scoring points in Lexington, but they've walked out of there with a win every time. And as a coach, you could tell Kirby Smart, he was obviously very pleased that they got the win, but I think he was more pleased by the fact that he's got stuff now that he can get people's attention.
Yep.
while you're sitting in position groups and watching film? Kind of take us through that from a coach's eye, getting through a tough contest, not playing a perfect game.
Well, let's talk about Kentucky first. And Coach Stoops, somebody I know well, I almost went and worked there as defensive coordinator right after the shutdown. I really considered it. Look at him after losses and what they do. Look at what he's done there at a supposed basketball school. So give him credit. A defensive coach, which is near and dear to my heart, but, they still do good things offensively. Now let's talk about Georgia. I think this is what you want as a Georgia team. We find a way to win. We have adversity. We win at the end. He talked a lot about leaders stepping up, but it was tough. And that's that thing, the big head, all the press clippings, how great you are, you're number one. That's really what you want. Can I find a way to win in an adverse environment? And Kentucky really had every opportunity to win that game and looked like they would win. Probably the better team won in the end, and probably just the way he wanted it to go.
And we know that Georgia has elite talent on the offensive side of the ball, and that's where I want to go here. But no Brock Bowers, no Ladd McConkey. You still have ETN and Carson Beck and what they do on that side. But it does seem like it's maybe less to worry about for potential defensive coordinators like Kane Womack going into next week in Tuscaloosa and some others that are on that schedule. Because those guys were elite, and I'm not going to say generational, but Brock Bowers, I'd say he's probably a generational player.
We talked about Williams early. So let's talk about from my mindset as a defensive coach, and I've got somebody that's really almost unguardable, Brock Bowers.
Yeah.
From seeing them, McConkey. You've got two guys who are starting. They're the number one guy in the NFL as rookies. That doesn't just happen, So those guys, you had two elite guys with all these other great guys around them. So now I've got to find them. How many times did they go to Brock Bowers in games? Auburn last year probably wins that game. He just takes over the game. Now the quarterback's got to get it to him all them. I think they're looking for those guys. Now, ETN came on. They started feeding him at the end of the game, and he started stepping up, which is what you'd need that guy to do. So I think they're looking for who those guys are, the elite difference makers.
All right, so any concern from what you saw from a Georgia football team for really their first – Clemson game, they were tested, did not score a lot of points in the first half. They go to Lexington, they don't score a lot. What side of the ball are you concerned with as you've seen this Georgia team so far?
Yeah, I think offensively. Now, knowing the guys at Clemson, what they do defensively, Coach Stoops at Kentucky, these are guys that know what they're doing. So you're going against, those were two good defenses. But I think you're still, who are the elite playmakers that make the difference? And that's what happens to those teams that really win. Now, they're going to be good enough defensively. They've got so much talent. They're so deep, and you've got a great defensive head coach. So they're always going to have that going for them. As I like to say, when you got defense, you're in every game. Now, when you get an offense that helps separate, that's going to be the next thing. So we're going to see what their offense starts to do. Obviously, we got the big matchup coming in another week.
All right, Smart Banks, Smart Call of the Week, and it was called early last week when Hank Brown was named starting quarterback for the Auburn Tigers. And, Coach, I just want to get your thoughts on what you saw as he looked impressive in my point of view, but you're the former coach. What did you think?
Yeah, I think just what you say, very cool, very calm, very collected. We're going to talk about this when we talk about the Arkansas-Auburn matchup here in a minute, but you see the difference as they went from a zone read team to an RPO team. So now it's the run throw. Very accurate. What do you have, 3 TDs, 4 TDs? 4 TD passes. Very smart. Now, New Mexico, I don't know how good their defense is, and I think that's been proven out. But driving rainstorm, he protected the ball, no turnovers. That's the things we look for any quarterback, and he throws the ball well. And I think we're going to just see a whole different side of the Auburn offense. One last thing, I thought it was a good point when we heard that Coach Freeze had been recruiting him since the 10th grade. So there was already this relationship. There's this confidence. He knows him. They know each other, so that's a big deal.
Yeah, and the 47 touchdowns and 3 interceptions he threw his senior year there at Lipscomb Academy, that's hard to do, even if you're throwing the ball to the nephews after Thanksgiving dinner. That's not easy to do. The thing that I was impressed with, though, Coach, you mentioned the driving rainstorm. That's adversity, him trying to go out, and some of the throws that he made, and not to be too critical of Peyton Thorne, but it was the throws that you're supposed to make. He made those throws, and he did some other things I thought that Auburn fans need to be encouraged about moving forward.
Well, to be a throwing offense, I used to say he's got to make that throw, and he's got to make it every time. Really, unless he's a runner, and we can talk about that when we start talking about the Arkansas quarterback. when you're a thrower, you got to make that throw every time. You've got to put it on the money, and you got to be super accurate, which he seems to be.
The intangibles, though, I did want to ask you about that. You could just see by his body language. What did you think about the way he operated?
That's right. He seemed confident, and that's what we talked about earlier. Guys that in the games enjoy it. They find a way to enjoy those games. The moment's not too big for him. This guy is that guy so far from what we see. He's got a lot more to prove. One last thing, and I think this was big. He had 0 checks missed, according to Coach Freeze. So, and I think that says a lot.
Smart Bank, they bring us that segment each and every week. It was a smart call by Hugh Freeze. We'll see if it pays off this week. But Smart Bank, good friends of the program.
Yeah, great friends of the program. Hometown banking, you get answers quick. From being on the advisory board with those guys, getting to know these guys. These guys were at another bank previous to that. I was with them. A lot of folks have went and followed these guys to Smart Bank because they do such a great job.
Webb Concrete and Building Materials brings us the building blocks to victory. And the matchup of the week we're going to talk about is the big one down on the Plains, Coach, as the Auburn Tigers' first SEC game, year number 2 for Hugh Freeze. Arkansas comes in after the big win against UAB. Should be a really tough game.
Yeah, I think we got all kind of storylines. I think you got Arkansas scoring 46 a game, Auburn scoring 44. We've got the change at quarterback. We've got the DC at Arkansas, was at Auburn. A lot of great storylines, a lot of good things to talk about. Should be a great one.
When you look at Auburn defensively, a lot of Auburn fans frustrated, not only with last week, but of course the first half versus Cal. Last week, you gave up some rushing yards. It seemed like that they were able to make adjustments. Dampier, he did connect on some long throws, but it's what I'm hearing is more of the concern with the push or the lack thereof with the defensive line, and that some of them just look slow, quite frankly. What did you see from Durkin against New Mexico? Try to break that down where it'll talk some of these Auburn fans off the ledge.
Well, I do think the D-line that Auburn has had in the past, and I think we get spoiled. When we've got dominant players up front, and that's why I say when the X's are bigger than O's sometimes, especially with that D-line, I don't see that. They're not bad. You've got to get more done with other people. That's where your multiplicity. And I do think there's a history there from Durkin of multiple fronts, as we've talked about before, 3 down, 4 down front bear. Now, I will say the quarterback at New Mexico, we talked about this on Monday. I think he's a special talent, and I think that's going to make them better as they get ready for this game. You got a runner-thrower coming this week in Arkansas who can really run it. They've had a chance to at least see that the week before. That should make them better.
How much pressure do you think we see, dialed up pressure, whether it's an edge guy walking up, whether it was Keyron Crawford, the kid that they got from Arkansas State, maybe a Keldrick Falk? Do we see more of those looks, in your opinion, this week?
I think so. That's a guy, I want to make him beat me throwing the ball. I don't want him scrambling around. I want a spy on the quarterback. And that was one of the first things, and we'll talk some other things defensively. I think this is a really good point. When I was a high school coach and the spread offense was really, Kentucky was running it. We were not seeing that in high school. We were not seeing it in college. Some people were throwing the ball. But then we started seeing these running quarterbacks. Well, we were seeing them in high school. The best athlete on the team, probably on the field, was at quarterback. He could run it and throw, and then he would get moved a lot of times when he got to receiver or DB. When you rush 4 people and you drop everybody else off, that's when the lanes are created for these guys. That's when the 3 down front came in, where I've got a guy spying. You can talk about Aaron Rodgers, anybody that can run and throw, and that's what we are now. That's where you see some of these 3 down fronts, as long as that 4th guy is working to the quarterback. So you can have a 4-man rush out of a 3 down front to have a guy assigned for the quarterback. Or I'm bringing pressure. Here comes 4 guys. One guy's got the quarterback, one guy's got the back, and that's going to create some man coverage situations. So the throws are there, which is why I've always said you've got to be able to play man.
Conversely, for Arkansas on the defensive side, you mentioned you've got a guy that played there, coach there, coming back 48-10. I'm sure that still stings a little bit from last year in Fayetteville. But you look at Auburn's offense, Hank Brown leading the way. What you've seen personnel-wise from Arkansas, do you think Auburn can have a balanced attack throwing the ball and running the ball?
Yeah, I think Arkansas's defense, once again, Oklahoma State, how good are they? UAB moved the ball up and down the field on them, and give UAB a lot of credit for that. I thought they did a great job against them. How good is Arkansas's defense? I don't know if they're great. So we may have a lot of similarities here. Once again, Auburn's such a tough place to play, such a great place to play for them. I think they've got the advantages. How does this freshman quarterback do in the situation? But now we talked off air about the running back, Jackson, from from Arkansas. You were there to see him in person.
Yeah, he's a beast.
6'2", 235, unbelievable. And of course, he's leading the SEC in rushing, so they're going to have to find a way to stop him.
Not only that, but you also have a guy named Andrew Armstrong, who's a kid originally out of Texas A&M Commerce, but already through the season, he's got 18 catches, over 400 yards, and he is a guy that can get lost, and it's just a physical matchup, so it'll be imperative.
Quarterback, running back, receiver. They're going to have to find a way to stop those guys.
Doubt, Coach.
All right, let's talk about Webb Concrete and Building Supplies. I always want to talk about their locations: Oxford Showroom, Oxford Ready Mix, Heflin, Roanoke Ready Mix Center, Pell City. Pell City's got lumber, concrete, and flooring, Birmingham, Homewood. Remember, Webb can build your house from the foundation up.
All right, the Alabama Power 5 of the week, Coach. Maybe some movers and shakers because you had a situation where Georgia didn't look very good. You had Texas, even with an injured quarterback. They got a big win. Where's your 5 looking at this week?
I'm just one of these guys, Georgia. I've kept Georgia at number 1.
So you're like Nick Saban. Nick says until somebody beats Georgia, Georgia's number 1.
That's how I feel. I did not know Coach Saban said that, but that's how I feel. Georgia number 1, Texas number 2.
That's the first time you've ever been mentioned in the
might have
same breath.
stolen it from you, Coach.
Nick Saban.
Well, I feel honored just to be considered. 3, Ohio State. They're leading the nation in scoring defense. Who have they played? So that's the question mark. I think they're the question mark just because of competition. Alabama at 4. Really improved there. Ole Miss at 5. They're number 2. We're going to talk about them defensively. They're number 2 in the nation. Jackson Dart, I think, he's putting up some crazy numbers. Tennessee. Well, I don't know. Kent State's not very good, but they were freaky good. 6, 7's Missouri, 8's Miami, 9's Oregon, 10 Penn State, 11 USC, 12 Utah, same as probably everybody else has got. But I think Ole Miss and Tennessee, we got to keep an eye on them.
Yeah. Alabama Power, they do so much for the area community and, of course, supporting college football like they do.
Yeah, and I keep talking about Alabama Power, how they give back, how they're involved. I think probably any project that I've been associated with, you always hear about Alabama Power, whether it's supporting schools, giving back to our community, being involved with local sports. They just do a great job of being involved in our community and across the state.
Donahue Chevrolet's Drive for Success, a very interesting topic, has been hot this week, Coach, and it has to do with NIL funding. You had the athletics director at Arkansas made headlines asking everyone in the state of Arkansas to pony up $1,200 per household to try to get their NIL funding up. This is an area fundraising that you were heavily involved in, bringing the program back at UAB. Of course, now NIL is taking on a life of itself. Just your thoughts on what you've seen and what you've heard this week.
Yeah, so a lot of insight from coaches and different people I spoke to. Number 1, this is the world we're in. I think we all agree to that. There's going to be maybe parameters put up. So we'll see how that goes. And I still say there's parameters that are needed, mainly to stop this tampering. That's the biggest problem. We could talk about small schools and big schools. I have some thoughts on that as well. But when you've got facilities already, now this is where you got to become a fundraiser for NIL. From a guy that had to raise for everything and did it at multiple places, that's now become the name of the game for the head coach. He's got to be willing to do that. Hopefully you've got good enough facilities where you're not taking, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, because you've got to get involved in this NIL. And we were talking off camera about, I don't know if anybody saw where Governor DeSantis was talking about the state of Florida. Obviously, they're not winning right now, 2 of their big-name schools. And he said, we need to get involved in the NIL game. So, obviously, we've heard about Tennessee raising ticket prices. To me, though, that makes sense. I don't know what but as a coach who wants to win, what are we doing to give ourselves every opportunity? In Tennessee, the number 1 in NIL right now.
1 or 2.
Let's see. What are they doing? So, if you're going to play, this is the game you got to be in. How are we best equipped to raise funds to put us in the game?
Well, it's a double-edged sword, because I understand Hunter Yurachek, the athletics director there at Arkansas, asking the fans, and I do appreciate the point that he made about the Waltons, the Walmart money, the J.B. Hunt money, the Stevens family money. I'm trying to remember who else, the Tyson money, and all of that. You can only go to that well every so often, and those folks have done a lot for that university, will continue to do so, but it's not all earmarked for football.
Right. Yeah.
But Coach, my whole point there was I would almost rather have the Tennessee model and that structure.
Yeah.
Go ahead and build it into my cost.
Right.
The it's just reading the room, and we talked about it earlier today, reading the room right now, this economy, inflation, the cost of goods, just to go to the grocery store. Now you're basically putting the onus on me as an Arkansas fan. If I can't come up with $1,200 and our football team is no good, it's my fault.
Yeah, so that's terrible messaging, to your point. That's not the way to do it. That's why I said the Tennessee model to me is the way to do it. I can choose to go to the game. The game's a little bit higher, but I know that's what I'm paying for versus a guilt trip. And I think just like we tried to do at UAB, where it was we, it was us, it was the city of Birmingham, it was trying to do things better. It was, hey, I believe in Birmingham, I believe in Alabama. That's how you do it. You've got to get people involved the right way. So that's probably two approaches. One probably the right way, maybe one the wrong way.
How tough is it right now, though, for these guys that are bringing in kids out from the high school level or through the transfer portal, the coaches that you talk to with NIL? Is it ultimately about max value, or is it different for different programs?
Yeah, I think it's tough across the board. I'm gonna even talk about. I'm going to use Jacksonville State. I'm doing the color this Saturday. Got to go watch those guys play. Obviously, Coach Rodriguez, great coach. Coach Trickett, guys I know. But they're even getting into the situation where, because they're trying to do a pavilion like we do or an indoor. How do you do that and raise money for NIL? And I don't want to talk out of school there, but that's kind of, now we're talking about the schools, those lower schools, the Conference USA, the Sun Belt. That's the problem when you've got to go out and get facilities. But facilities are still important. How we feed the kids are still important. So I think you got to do the right messaging. I think we've got to, hopefully we get some legislation that at least brings some of this back together. But if I'm out there and I'm in that space, I'm out there raising money.
In regards to the NIL moving forward, and a lot of programs are saying we're going to need around $22 million a year to outfit your whole athletic department paying. We talked today on Three Man Front in regards to the budget at Ohio State. It was what, 15 million this year for their football team. How's that sustainable? Because the Ohio States and the Alabamas and the Georgias of the world, there's only so much money out there. And to have to replenish that year in and year out, how can this happen over the next 2 or 3 years without somebody stepping in and saying, we got to put a halt to this?
Well, and I've said that every time somebody's asked, something's got to be done for the game, so we don't lose the game. We don't crush our fans. We don't crush our citizens. I mean, something has got to be done. We had our opportunities 3 years before it happened, 2 years before it happened, 1 year. Now it's spilt milk. But we still can do some things to help this situation. That's where we've got to have some leadership come forward and help us. It's just like the rules that are created, whether we're talking about safety for players or we're talking about coaches where they're not on the road 365 days a year. Somebody's got to come in here with some leadership to protect this game that we all love.
Ultimately, Coach, what is going to be the call to action, whether it's Congress, whether it's at the state level, some of these folks making decisions, if we can put up some of the guardrails that don't infringe on a person's ability to make and maximize the most of their opportunity. If you put a salary cap on it, I can understand that, but there's still going to be programs that do what they did prior to NIL. Yeah. There'll be money that exchanges hands underneath the table. It's not accountable. It's not trackable. What do you think ultimately gets Congress to move on this quicker and sooner rather than later?
Well, I think as you start seeing the drop-off, as we start seeing the smaller schools start dropping off, what that does to that university and that community, a la what DeSantis was saying, how important is this to our community? How important is this to our state? That's where hopefully we'll start seeing some smarter heads prevail, some leadership come forward, because everybody's that's in that game, that their jobs are on the line. They've got to go and get the money and do what they can do. So I think there's got to be somebody step forward. I think if coaches and presidents would come together and say, hey, we're all for our players. We want to help them make money, but we've got to do something to protect the game so we don't price ourselves out of being able to play.
Speaking of NIL, we heard this when it first came to be, that there potentially was going to be a locker room problem where you have one guy that is making more money than another guy in that locker room. Before you got out of it and the people that you communicate with now, how big of a story is that in people's locker rooms these days with the NIL, people being paid more than other guys?
Well, you probably guys hear the same rumors I hear at Florida, that's a huge problem at their place. Let's look at the people that aren't handling it well. Let's look at their one loss. Let's look at the problems they're having. That's the issues that I knew was going to happen. Remember when I said we're going to try and treat seat 1 and seat 10 and seat 20 the same? Everybody knows seat 1's the quarterback maybe, or seat 10 is the star linebacker. but we're still wanting to be on the same team. So the people that are managing that the best are the ones that are being successful. But we've created a lot more sets of problems just in the ultimate team game. We're just creating individuals.
And I know that the kids inside of that locker room talk, Coach, but I do believe that one of the main reasons, not only from a conference level and commissioners not wanting these NIL deals to be transparent and publicized, but also for a coach internally in the locker room and knowing that one of your teammates who you think you haven't been given the same opportunity, maybe it's not the same amount of reps, or he's just more highly regarded than you and he's making $1 million and that's publicized, that's got to drive a rip. It's human nature.
Well, Andy Kennedy and I talked about this when we were talking about he saw it coming for us. We were both talking about it was coming. It was already in basketball, and we laughed at the time. But he said, "Hey, I'm just every year you're recruiting your roster, you're recruiting." I said, "Yeah, you're talking about 13 to 15 guys," and he said, "You're right. This is 125 guys now. 85 are on scholarship, but every one of them has their own issues. Every one of them." And we wanted that to be important. What's going on with their family? What's going on with their grades? What's going on with their girlfriend? Now we've added this other element that's so out of our control as a coach, it just makes it really tough.
And what do you think we're going to get? And I threw out the idea of maybe having some of these NIL deals performance-based, but there's a flip side of that. What's going to happen with a wide receiver who's got to have a certain amount of catches, touchdowns? He's working with a quarterback goes through his progressions, doesn't throw at him enough, then all of a sudden you've created more problems.
I would love to see a contract. And you were talking about things that happen. I think if we create rules and people want to go around the rules, that's on them. I think we've got to have some rules, some standards. And then if somebody does that, then that's part of it. And we've lived with that for years.
Donahue Chevrolet. I know they're near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, Donahue Chevrolet, DonahueChevrolet.com. I've got a Chevy Tahoe from them. My daughter's got a Tahoe. So they've got great vehicles, just great guys to work with, and I think they're going to really give you a fair price and really work with you.
Radiance Technologies Defense of the Week, and I know you got a good one this week, Coach.
Yeah, we almost went with Kentucky. They almost pulled that thing out, and obviously Coach Stoops, we talked about that earlier. We're going to go with Ole Miss. I know they hadn't maybe played the best teams, but they're 3 points a game. They're the number 2 defense in the country. Wake Forest, I have a lot of – Coach Clausen, those guys, I have a lot of respect for those guys, what they do offensively. Once again, is it players, is it scheme? Right now I'm thinking scheme, but we've got – I've always going to go with the coaches, but I think they've got some really good pieces over there.
All right, so speaking of Pete Golding, one of the things that we had on our show all the time was that it didn't seem like Pete Golding blitzed a lot.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask you, Joe Lee Dunn was famous at Mississippi State of always blitzing, always wanting to call a blitz. Do we still have that in college football? Is there anybody that will do that nowadays, or do they scheme other ways?
That's a great question. So let's talk about this 3-safety defense. And I talked about Bear, I talked about 3 down, I talked about 4 down. Now, when you look in the back end, when you get that wide view and you see 3 safeties, and what you're going to see, those 3 safeties could be even, but a lot of times you'll see the middle safety start to creep down. And they're using him in the box like a linebacker and also in coverage. Also, you've got all these different combinations. You've got all the 3-3 blitzes. Joe Lee Dunn, we talked about. A lot of this comes from Rocky Long. If you remember, Rocky Long was out at San Diego State.
Yep.
Last seen as defensive coordinator, I think at Syracuse. Coach Arnett, who was at Mississippi State. We've got coach at New Mexico from last year was in that tree. So that's that 3-3, 3-2 blitz scheme, multiple guys coming, a lot of this guys in the secondary. Also got our guy out at UNLV that was at Missouri.
Barry Odom.
Yeah. He's using that scheme, doing a very good job, did that at Arkansas. So I don't probably not as much blitzkrieg as Joe Lee. We need to tell Joe Lee stories, and maybe our next show, I've got a lot of good ones.
Oh, listen, it was always fun watching a Mississippi State football game, watching him almost be in sandals on the sideline with his shirt tail hanging out.
I don't know if everybody noticed he didn't have a headset on.
Yeah, no headset.
So you know what would happen, and I remember this was a story from Coach Trickett and Coach Saban, that they would, and Coach Fisher, they would run away from his sideline because he couldn't see who was coming in and out of the game. As great a defensive coordinator as he was, but he wouldn't listen to use his headset. So
that is
very interesting.
That is brilliant. All right, our time is almost up here. Another week has gone by. This has been the Bill Clark Show presented by Dr. Pepper. Jimmy Lee was honored last Thursday night. All the great people at Buffalo Rock.
Oh, my gosh. Great honor for Jimmy Lee. Mike Sly Foundation, what a great charity. Jimmy Lee, great guy, obviously. Dr. Pepper, Buffalo Rock. I also want to mention Radiance Technology. Those guys at Radiance, what they're doing for us, Bill Bailey and those guys, and helping protect our country.
We need to get some of those lids. That's a good looking Dr. Pepper.
Yes, I will make sure we get some more of those.
I have to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
All right,
Get to Jimmy Lee.
We'll see you next week on the Bill Clark Show, presented by Dr. Pepper.
This has been the Bill Clark Show, presented by Dr. Pepper.